Hey guys, welcome to the Selena 2 deep dive. I usually do one of these for each character that I take to SS20, and it's no different this season. I'll be carrying them on. Don't be put off by the video length, I'll put full timestamps in the description, so that you can just jump straight to any part that you're interested in or need help with. This is the first build that I've played this season in Afterlight, and it was quite enjoyable for the most part. There are a few variants of this build, but I was playing the Frost Terra version, particularly building into Approaching Nightfall and alternative reaps. I also kept the cycle I resist, and I'll go through what this means during this deep dive, but take that into account that this deep dive is presented through the lens of playing Frost Terra. Before we jump into it, I'll just get some stuff out of the way first. I have a Discord, which is linked in the description, that you're welcome to join and ask any questions or clarifications. There's also a Google Docs linked in the description. Just go to Selena to Afterlight tab to find all of the written information there. And even though I always hate to say it, I spend quite a lot of my spare time putting together these deep dives, and even though getting to pass on knowledge to the community and your view is enough, a like, a comment, or even subscribing all go a long way to showing your support and helping the channel grow. Particularly, this deep dive was very annoying to put together because my second monitor actually broke yesterday, and I'm waiting for another one to get delivered. So I'm currently reading this off my phone. So with that said, let's dive into the character, and I'll start off with the strengths and the weaknesses. So a key strength of Selena 2 is the auto bomber playstyle that she brings, and it's very accessible from as early as the campaign if you really wish to. She has a different hero trait tree that no other hero has, and if you really want to, you can automate her from the very start. I wouldn't recommend it because of the minus move speed she has, so maybe delay it all a little bit later, but you can still get it very early, like in the league. This is a massive draw to the character and introduces an RF style gameplay if you're familiar with it from PoE. It's very low input, you just walk around and everything around you dies, which lets you dodge anything dangerous fairly easily. As for her weaknesses, I would say she has two main weaknesses in my opinion, and that is range and scalability. Unless you give up build power, as in your raw DPS, your circle around you will be quite small, and you may end up having issues with uptime on things like SS20. On other content, you will eventually be able to just overgear it and it won't matter, but it was something that I noticed was quite hard keeping good uptime on the second hardest content, particularly this season with the bombs, meaning you have to occasionally move out. She's also not very straightforward to scale in damage, especially if you haven't played a dot build before like I hadn't. I think this was quite a common complaint from people that were playing it and asking questions in my Discord and YouTube comments that they didn't know how to like really scale her damage. And we did end up getting to around the 10 trill damage mark with some more space to grow, but it did take quite a lot of looking into in order to actually hit that. I don't mean to put you off though, because she was still very fun to play. I am usually a slower SS20 runner. I don't get it in 3 days like some people. But this was actually the quickest I've got SS20 in a season, so definitely possible to do that. And yeah, she's very fun overall and a great experience, especially while mapping. Next, I'm going to explain some of the mechanics that are vital to understand how they work before you play this character. So, firstly, I'll go through Reap, and Reap is the main way that we're actually scaling our damage, and how it essentially works is that a part of the remaining dot damage on the enemy is dealt instantly. And if we have 1 billion dot DPS sustained on the target and we Reap 0.2 seconds of that dot, we'll do 200 mil hits with our Reap. The Reap duration increases the base damage of that reap, so it will count for a higher number of seconds. So if we had 100% reap duration on a 0.2 second base reap, we'd be doing a reap for 0.4 seconds of the damage. Likewise, the reap recovery reduces the cooldown time that is on reaps, and each reap is separate. We typically fully build around the cycle I resist from our hero traits early, and we introduce reaps on weapon later when we get approaching nightfall. And I'll talk about these more in their own sections later. However, if you want to read more about reaping, or you need a bit of a more in-depth look and an in-depth read-through, I'd suggest this page on the TLI Compendium. If I remember, I'll link it below, but I'll definitely forget. So you just go to TLI Compendium and look up Reap, and it'll be right there. Moving on to Ill Omen. Ill Omen is a mechanic that's enabled by the Ominous Curse. Now, Ominous doesn't add any base damage, instead it begins to stack Ill Omen on targets. With no changes, boss enemies gain 1 stack of Ill Omen for every 5% of their max life they take from dot damage. This includes from Reaps. At 10 stacks, it does a giant hit of 20% of the max life of the target, and this works on endgame bosses such as SS20. Ill Omen cumulative efficiency lowers the amount of damage needed to apply each stack. If you have 100% Ill Omen cumulative efficiency, it'll halve the damage needed, so 1 stack every 2.5% max life. With high enough Ill Omen cumulative efficiency, you can have this Ill Omen go off twice on bosses. Once again, if you'd like to read further into this, I would recommend the TLI Compendium page. It's very informative and it goes into the different breakpoints. Now, the math is a little bit funky on Ominous and how much DPS it adds because it doesn't add anything to the target dummy, but I think the most accurate is it is 20% additional damage at 0% cumulative efficiency, 33% at 50%, and 40% at 100%, as this is the amount of quote-unquote health reduction that the bosses have at these breakpoints. Because our source of Ominous is on a hero trait that leads to the cycle I resist, we have an interesting piece of tech we can use that I thought I'd mention right now. By using 2 curses without a source of a second curse, we can have Biting Cold or Entangling Pain overwrite Ominous, effectively reducing the cumulative efficiency that we have. As you can see, they're sort of competing on the boss's health bar on the screen. This means that without investing in it at all, we can have it fire off at a custom time during the fight by controlling when we begin to build stacks. In hindsight, I would say it's better to have aimed for 100% Ill Omen cumulative efficiency and got 2 shots off during the fight, but it is something that I thought I'd mention here as I used it during my SS20 fight. If you want to check out a slightly more in-depth explanation of this, I go through this in my SS20 video for Selena 2, which was posted a few days ago. Last mechanic I'll explain is Affliction. Affliction is a debuff that has to ramp up, but baseline it gives 1% additional dot damage taken per stack, so 100% at 100 stacks. We make sure we have a good amount of Affliction inflicted per second to ramp it up faster during maps. My build ended up with close to 200 per second, for example, so it's ramping in just over half a second. Affliction gets scaled and further boosted by all the Affliction effect we have dotted throughout the build, coming from talents and our gear primarily, along with the Cataclysm support on our main skill. Yet again, TLI Compendium has a great article on Affliction that goes way more in-depth than I have time to go into now, so check that out if you wish to read more about it. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about damage scaling and where our damage is actually coming from. So our damage, particularly early, is coming from the Reap of the Cycle I Resist. How this scales is it takes a small percentage of our Terra charge's remaining duration when it's reused at its base Reap. On the same node, we have Critical Strike rating increases the duration of Terra skills, so this is why Selena 2 is speccing into Critical Strike rating when other dot builds do not. In the endgame, I was getting Terra charge duration of around 14 seconds, and 8% of this was a base Reap, so like over 1 second, maybe like 1.12 seconds of Reap, versus a max roll of 0.24 seconds, which is the highest tier 0 roll on weapons, and this is just huge for the single instance damage. Once we get into the end game, we do need other sources of Reap, so this is where Approaching Nightfall and the Reaps on our weapons come in. I chose to go these plus Cycle as there's some overlap in scaling damage. I know some people have been dropping the Cycle I Resist. Cycle doesn't need Reap Recovery as it doesn't have a cooldown, but these regular Reaps do need it. Stuff like Reap Duration and of course base damage affects both. Approaching Nightfall, as far as we can tell, does not affect the Cycle I Resist, only traditional regular sources of Reap. Outside of this, scaling your damage via regular sources of additional damage layers increase the damage your dot deals, which further increases your Reap damage. I'm going to go through all of the hero traits now, including the ones we don't take. So the very first one, Dance for the Deep, is what the hero is named after, and every Selena 2 will have this. And It essentially means the main Terra skill always is centered on you and follows you. Non-main Terra skill cannot deal damage, so you can't have multiple Terras, but it is what has this like circle effect around us. So whether we're casting it manually or we have the activation medium Terra automatically casting it, it'll always be centered around us and just follow us as we move, essentially. So next up, I'm going to go through Silence Severance. So Silencing Severance is how we get automation. So main skills cannot be supported by other activation mediums, so you can't put a different activation medium on. The max Terra charge stacks is +1, and the main Terra skill is supported by activation medium Terra. And what activation medium Terra is it seals 20% of our mana and gives us minus 30% move speed. When an enemy is within 25 meters and Terra charges at its max stacks, it automatically uses the supported Terra skill and gives 30% additional damage for the supported skill. And then when you level it, you do get some sealed mana compensation. This is generic sealed mana compensation. This, I would recommend that you don't go early because of this minus 30% move speed. And by early, I mean like first node in the campaign. You do get to choose the order which you go for them. I would say pick this up second or third. Yeah, it's very good. It's very nice having the automation, like on demand essentially when you want it. It also gives a surprising amount of damage because the Terra charges are Frost Terra, gains, I believe, 26% additional damage per Terra charge when it is used at when the recovery speed is enough to actually support it being used every time. And then the activation medium itself actually gives 30% additional too. So surprising amount of damage from this. I have seen some people not take this, but I believe most Selena 2s are going to be taking Silencing Severance just because it is a bit of a core identity for the build, I would say. Just this RF style gameplay. Next up is the Paradise Eye Curse. So enemies within the main Terra skills area are cursed with level 1 Ominous. Ominous, we went through, it is how we're stacking Ill Omen up, and it gives just additional damage against cursed enemies. So, interesting having the actual curse on the hero trait, and we can do that sort of overrating tech that we had before. This does mean you don't technically need a skill in your active skills, so you gain damage or tankiness there, like tangentially, if that makes sense. So pretty interesting. Or, you know, if you want to use a 2 curse setup, you only need 1 on your active skills. Or, you know, I was going to say Dream Affix, but we don't have Dream Affix anymore. You'd need a prefix on your ring, like Entanglement Pain on your ring, for example. Next up is Cycle Eye Resist, and talked about this already a little bit, but 25% of the increase and decrease on critical strike rating is also applied to your Terra skill duration, and it does get quite long later. And then when you recast a Terra skill, if the previous main Terra skill hasn't ended, it reaps damage over time equal to 8% of the previous skill's remaining duration from enemies within this skill area. Now, it goes off so fast, I'll just walk up to a dummy. You'll see that you basically get the whole duration, because every single time this is like going down, we are recasting them, and we have them lasting around 14-15 seconds, and it is just going off so fast that the actual remaining duration is like 95% of the duration, if that makes sense. So you do get quite big reaps. It is what these 2.9 trill hits are from. It's near the single instance damage cap. So yeah, very, very good. This is what we're building around essentially on our build. There are some that don't go for Cycle Eye Resist, and instead they just build around traditional sources of reap. So on weapons, things like, I don't know, just off the top of my head, the one like King's Boon has one, like, you know what I mean, like multiple sources of reap. Some people are doing that and then not picking up the crit strike rating and the Terra charge stuff, but yeah, this is how I decided to build. So the traits that we don't take, so I'll go through Drenched Hem. Drenched Hem is activation medium Terra seals life instead. You gain 1% additional damage for every 3% life sealed, so let's just say this is 33% additional damage, plus it essentially kicks you back your mana that you're sealing. So this could be useful, but I haven't seen too many people play this. It is basically just 33% additional damage. I don't really think there is that much benefit to having it on your life instead of your mana, because, you know, if you're playing Lone Walkers like I'm playing, you eventually get enough sealed mana comp that it just doesn't matter. Like, we have plenty of mana left over, and we have tons of life left over, like we could reserve, and this is with 450% auras too. So next up is Crimson Endless Dance, and this is actually quite a popular one. Before release, this looked kind of bad, but it did get buffed before release, or clarified, I guess, before release. It basically enters a random dance step state when you cast your main Terra skill every 5 seconds, and the dance step lasts 5 seconds. So the dance steps, this is the line I think that got clarified after the reveal, and the duration is affected by skill effect duration affixes. So you get more skill effect duration, and it makes these last longer, so you can get to the point where you have all three up at once. And what they do is, the first one, Crimson Dash, 33% move speed. Second one, Agonizing Revival, is regens 13% of your life and energy shield while this dance step is active per second. And then Eternal Sleep is, while this dance step is active, if an enemy stays within the main Terra skills area for more than 0.5 seconds, they enter Eternal Sleep for 2 seconds. What is Eternal Sleep? 66% additional damage taken, lasts 2 seconds, ends after taking damage equal to 30% of max life. The immobilization and attack restriction can only take effect once per monster, so this isn't really adding that much damage on bosses, because it can only take effect once. However, this is very good while mapping. So very popular node to take while mapping, especially if you're building around the duration, so you can get very good uptime on this on these dance steps. So next up is Dreambreaker's Gaia. Now this is another fairly popular option because it scales quite well with the hero trait level, and it creates a Crimson Tide while the main Terra skill lasts. Crimson Tide's like, you might have seen some gameplay where it's like a tornado following them, and that's what the Crimson Tide is, and it just continually knocks enemies back into this tide, and while they are in the tide, they get 35% additional damage taken, and this scales up to 45%, and then I believe 55% at level 3. So this is a lot of added damage. However, it doesn't have 100% uptime. It's only while they're in the tide, and the tide doesn't like stick to enemies. If you played Selena 1, like Howling Gale, you would know that like the Howling Gale essentially sticks to enemies, right? Whereas this Dreambreaker's Gaia, that kind of looks similar to Howling Gale, does move off enemies, so you don't have 100% uptime on it. I think you can get very good uptime, but it's not 100%, so take that into account if you're going to go with Dreambreaker's Gaia. Next up is Layered Hem, and to be honest with you, these next two nodes, especially Layered Hem, Lonely Ensemble no one really goes, but Layered Hem is, in my opinion, I haven't really looked into it too much because it wasn't the version of the build I played, but this is more for on-hit versions of the build. Gives you Terra Charge recovery and increases to spell burst stacks. It's also applied to max Terra Charge stacks. So, yeah, it's not really for us, so I'm kind of going to skip over talking about it, but, you know, there are other variants of the build that may want to use this. And then Lonely Ensemble, I don't think I've seen anyone use it. When casting your main Terra skill, it summons a Crimson Shade inside the Terra skill area for every 1 stack of max spell burst, and then the Shade is like a copy of you that doesn't move, and it just casts your Terra, and it has minus 60% additional damage for the Terra cast by Crimson Shade. Now, I don't think anyone's really tested it. Like, I'll go on the hero ranking and we'll just see how many people are actually playing it. Okay, it's typical. We don't have any hero trait data for Selena 2 for some reason, but I haven't seen anyone really play it at all. Yeah, so the issue with it is while you're mapping, imagine I'm just like imagine my sentry's like my clone, I'm just dropping it behind me every time, right? So I'm dashing through the map, and I'm leaving this clone behind, this either not touching the enemies, or it's killing stuff behind me and I have to backtrack for the loot. There is a world I could see you taking it on bosses and maybe it works, but you also have to go deep in the hero trait tree. You have to take all 3 of these nodes to actually take it, and it just means we're not able to pick up the dot stuff or the automation, and even Crimson Endless Dance we can't pick up. It's just not for our build, right? So yeah, that's all the hero traits. Next, I'm going to go through uniques. I'll go through all of the early game uniques, like the day 1 through to the TM8 uniques first, and then I'll go through the end game uniques and options, and also the Corrode options. I'm just going to type this in live into the auction house. I'm not going to edit it, sorry. It's very annoying with one monitor to edit like a bunch of these different clips, so you'll have to bear with me while I type it in. But yeah, Broken Dream. So Broken Dream, pretty good early. It gives you max frostbite rating, which is very helpful for hitting the 100 frostbite rating breakpoint that you need to hit for enemies to be considered frozen. And it also inflicts cold infiltration on enemies cursed by biting cold, so you save talent points here. Next up is Air Treaders. Now these have a source of blur on, which is very helpful early. Also have movement speed, so they're very good for coming out of their campaign where you just really care about speed and getting through stuff early on. Next up is Siren Face Guard. So Siren Face Guard is very good early on. This was introduced reworked this league, and you actually get this from a treasure trove, I believe. And it has cold damage, and nearby enemies within 10 meters are cursed by level 10 to level 15 Biting Cold. Biting Cold is the curse that increases the cold damage taken. I think level 10 to 15 is roughly 25% additional cold. So very good helm. I used it for quite a while. Next up is Eternal Sea Fog. So Eternal Sea Fog's here is this belt. So pretty much all these stats you really like. So like the defense when you swap over to Energy Shield is helpful. The Ellie res early, very helpful because it can be quite annoying to get. Blur effect, very cool. Also has blur, gains additional effect, 0.3% move speed for every point of blur rating, and this is scaled up by the blur effect. And you get 10% move speed for 1 second when you actually lose blur, and then you'll cycle back into the blur, and then you'll get your move speed back. So actually, really quite good belt early on. Next up is Ice Pulse, and Ice Pulse is a lower level gloves, and so it is great for mobility. It has max charges here, which is just, you can see here, like, I have 3 max charges, so I can like store the cooldowns essentially, and this is really good, like really helpful early on. Also has, when defeating a frostbitten enemy, you get 20% of the current cooldown of potion and mobility skills refunded to you. I did use potions early. I used the elixirs early, and that was really helpful for staying alive. Also has quite a chunk of spell damage, so pretty good for damage, and also some frostbite rating, which is helpful for hitting the breakpoint too. Next up is Restless Glacier. Restless Glacier again has frostbite rating, which helps you hit the breakpoint. Chunk of intelligence, which is very good early on. A heavy amount of cold res for an early unique as well. And then also has this frozen enemies have a 10 to 15% chance to explode when defeated, dealing true damage equal to 80 to 100% of their max life to enemies within a 6-meter radius. I didn't need to use this myself. However, people swear by the explosions being very, very helpful for when they're first going into a new time mark, or they're going into Profound, for example. So this really helps with just creating this like shotgunning effect from the smaller mobs onto larger rares that you might have to wait a couple of seconds to actually kill without it. Do take into account this is frozen, so you need to have 100 frostbite rating. So, but you would usually have it by this point anyway. Next up is Twilight Vestment. So Twilight Vestment, I used this for I think a day early. It was when I swapped over to Energy Shield. Has decent chunk of Energy Shield, active skill level, and then it has this when reaping Energy Shield starts charging immediately mod, so you can spec out of on your tree, usually use a talent point there. Has some Energy Shield, charge speed, reap duration, elemental resistance, just all stats you want early. These were quite expensive early. I would say don't go too crazy on this early. It's not like make or break item. It's not like a build around. It's just very good before you step into like a pretty good rare item. Next up, I used heavy wear, if I can actually spell it correctly. So heavy wear has chunk of gear armor, so this protects you from fizz and from elemental damage too. Max life, and then it has additional damage taken by nearby enemies, so this is just a damage multiplier, and then minus additional damage dealt by nearby enemies, and this is a defensive layer. So heavy wear, very good early on. Next up is, if I can scroll down, next up is Undying Faith. So Undying Faith was a little bit of a slept-on item, I would say. It gives you additional damage, it gives you a couple of levels on auras, and also gives you the sealed mana comp back that you lose from your activation medium Terra hero trait. This was pretty cool for the Lone Walker swap, pretty helpful for that. Next up is King's Boon. So King's Boon gives a big source of reap, so this is 0.3% of damage over time. It does have a 6-second recovery though, so heavy on the recovery side, but this is like a very strong reap for early on. Also has Energy Shield, decent chunk of cold res. You do want a minus roll here on the additional damage over time taken if you can get it. And the move speed, ideally you want this to be high, but you might have to just settle. These were, again, quite expensive early. Like day one, I think it was the most expensive item I brought. And Inexplorable Doom just gives Ominous, and obviously we don't care about this because we already have Ominous. Last item for the early game items is Silent Area. So Silent Area, these again come from treasure troves. I think these come from the very last treasure trove in the campaign before you fight Paloma. So these have a huge chunk of intelligence. Like this is a ton of intelligence. Good amount of reap duration, critical strike rating, which we care about because it increases our Terra skill duration. And critical strikes cannot deal additional damage, but we're a dot build, right? So we're not critting anyway. Yeah, they're very good coming out of the campaign, but they very quickly lose out to regular res, so just replace them when you can. Get something with a reap duration, maybe some in-on, and this usually comes out ahead of these silent areas. So moving on to the endgame, or the expensive early uniques, and their best corrodes. So Crimson Gash. So Crimson Gash, I would say, is like the build-around item. It's a mandatory upgrade, and it's basically custom built for Selena too. So defense obviously increases your energy shield. It's very, very good. Decent chunk of elemental resist. Ground divide on your main skill, and when consuming Terra Charge, you gain 1 stack of Gash for every 1 stack of Terra Charge consumed. So 8% additional Terra skill damage, and this is multiplicative. And you get minus 12% Terra Charge recovery speed. So you do have to take this into account, and this stacks up to 8 times. So this isn't 64% additional. This is... It multiplies the previous damage by 8%, if that makes sense. So it's a lot stronger than 64%. Also saves you a point on the ground divide. I would say, personally, the best corrodes to get on this endgame would be defense. This goes, I think, all the way up to 40% defense. The elemental resist, which I think goes up to 15% elemental resist, so you can just save getting it elsewhere on your build. And the ground divide, going up to level 40, I think added like 8% additional damage for me. So I would say get the ground divide at like 38 to 40 if you can, and then get one of these two. This bottom line, when consuming Terra Charge, it just gives you your stacks of Gash quicker, so it doesn't really matter that much, like, because these if I jump out of this, you'll see Gash is up here, is just always up. There's never a point where it's down, right? So yeah, that is Crimson Gash. So next up is Israfel's Law. Now, Israfel's Law, I didn't build around. These are essentially if you want to have Focus Blessing, but I like Divine Grace on my belt blend. So Israfel's Laws are for stacking Focus Blessings. They're not really for this exact version of the build. They are a great build around, but they require you to build into the Focus Blessings. I chose not to go this path as, you know, as I said, I like Divine Grace just to give me tankiness. Best Corrode for these would be the additional cold damage and the Gear Energy Shield. The Blessing Duration shouldn't really matter. You should have enough Blessing Generation that, you know, this doesn't matter at all. And the Crit Strike damage doesn't matter at all because we're not critting because we're a dot build. Next up is Valerie's Night Scroll. So Valerie's Night Scroll. So I would say they are the go-to boots if you aren't going to play with Lone Walkers, or they're a very good Vorax option. So this is the item that I chose to put on my Vorax, and they're what you start scaling a ton of damage from Blur Effect from. So the best Corrodes are going to be the Blur, so the additional damage on the Blur, and probably the move speed if you're using them base on your boots. And the best like Vorax options, sorry, I got stun locked there, but the best like Vorax options, I would say, are Blur, gains the additional damage, so you want this 100% of the time. And then once you have this, it's a toss-up between Stealth Stab and Move Speed. Stealth Stab gives you minus additional damage taken, while Blur is active. You won't get this 25% additional damage because we're using fixed Blur rating. So we're never... Our Blur is never ending, essentially. So you only get this 15% like DR here. So it's just whether you want the move speed or you want the 15% damage reduction. But this one here, this Blur gains an additional effect for Vorax especially. I will talk more about Vorax later, but for Vorax especially, this is the most important line. Next up is Folklore of Locking Fingers, and this is a popular one, but is one that I skipped. So it has Blur effect and dot damage from that from Blur. Blur gains an additional effect. You get additional damage for Blur. I like these early, but I do think they kind of lose out to rare rings. The point where you'd use these, your Blur is still like dropping from 100 to 0. And I don't really like having like variable damage, if that makes sense. I kind of like my damage to be as sustained as possible. And by the time you get 120 fixed Blur from like a Phantasmagoria, you don't want these anymore. The Blur effect is good. Also, the damage over time would be good if you have Phantasmagoria, but I think you can just do better for rings. Because it is essentially just these two mods. The Energy Shield on Life's nice, but it's just like... It's not a needle pusher, really. Next up is Ice Drinker's Cage, and it's another one I didn't use this league. It's always a solid way to scale frost damage, gives you a ton of damage, but not much else. If you're playing Lone Walkers, I would take a rare with Aura Effect and Sealed Mana Comp over these every time, but it is very good if you're not playing Lone Walkers. And remember to swap your talent out of Extreme Coldness if you do take these. Now, Extreme Coldness is typically what we take on the tree. I think I used Ice Drinker's Cage in 3 of my 5 builds last season, off the top of my head at some point. I think, anyway. And on at least one occasion, I totally forgot to respec out of Extreme Coldness, so I doubled up on the Extreme Coldness, which is just completely useless, so just beware on that. As for the rolls and corrodes, the main skill level, you want this to be +1. I think you can corrode it from 0 to +1. And you can corrode this bottom line into an immunity. And I think it's random between one of these that it gets corroded into. If you don't hit that Corrode, or you don't have that on your Corrode, you want this to be as low as possible. This is effects of crowd control received, not given, right? So a higher roll here means you you potentially scale in the paralysis to be very lethal against you. So just make sure you're paying attention to that. Next up is Dawnbreak. So Dawnbreak, it's a great belt, especially if you can get it early. Make sure you get an intelligence version of this. The random stat affix is intelligence, dexterity, and strength, and I think it rolls from like low 60s all the way up to like 90. Make sure you get 1% additional damage per 2 fervor instead of 3. And you even gain Terra skill duration from the fervor, which increases your DPS because the fervor just gives you crit strike rating. So very good like DPS belt. I chose not to use it because I didn't really think I needed the DPS at the point. I did put it on. I didn't really gain that much DPS from it, so I just resold it essentially straight away. Light Hunter belt. So Light Hunter belt is like the exact opposite of Dawnbreak. And Light Hunter belt foregoes any offensiveness, and instead it just makes you pretty tanky. And again, this is another belt that I used a lot last season. I think I used it on like 4 of my 5 characters. It's a very solid defensive light in its own right, but I ended up going Vorax on belt, so I didn't want to go for a nice like double corroded one here. So best double corrode lines I would say is this minus additional energy charge speed. So you want this to be low. This corrodes this from 6% to, or minus 6% to minus 4%. I think this is the best line. And then it's just dealer's choice between the minus additional damage taken, like damage reduction line here, and the max energy shield, either the flat or the percent. So all 3 of these options very good. I would probably say the strictly best 2 lines are these 2 at the bottom, but as long as you have the energy shield charge speed at -4 instead of -6, the other ones aren't like super deal breakers, right? There is one more item that I haven't talked about, which is Lone Walkers. Now, Lone Walkers, this is a Lone Walker version of the build. You get this with Deep Pain. I'm going to talk about the Lone Walker setup later on, though, on its own, so I'm not going to talk about that here. But that was all of the uniques, anyway, and helpful Corrodes for Endgame. Next up is early time mark information, and luckily I have like all of this information on build codes, which you can find in the description. Runs all the way from my day 1 all the way to SS20. Beware, I'm at 11 out of 15 codes. I am playing more characters this season, so some of these are probably going to get deleted. I'll just delete the ones. I usually delete the ones with the lowest amount of thumbs up, but like early on, it was essentially defenses in particular, it was life-based, and we were using Compound Tonic, and we were using Tailored Remedy. We were using Tailored Remedy to scale Agony Dew for damage, and Compound Tonic for tankiness, and this felt very tanky, to be honest with you, this setup with Heavyware. And then I think the next day I swapped to ES. So day 2 swapped to ES, and I picked up Twilight Vestment. I was still using Golden Touch. Golden Touch I didn't cover in the uniques, but because I only used it for a couple of days with these elixirs, it was giving the 20% additional. You want this to roll, I think this rolls 15 to 19, you might as well get a high roll because it's a very cheap item. Yeah, just swapped to Siren Face Guard, King's Boon as well. I did have Reaps early, so these are tier 1 mods, these Reaps. I think it was pretty good having these early, to be honest with you. I kept them basically throughout the whole time that I had the build. Picked up a subtle impact pedigree of the god, but yeah, you can see here we had subtle impact, so don't make the same mistake there. Make sure you get one that isn't already on your talents. This is, purely a silly mistake by me. I was testing other stuff and yeah, didn't realize what pedigree I'd put on. And then like day 3, I think we still had this, yeah, in day 3, it's typical. Just really make sure you don't do this. Is very easy mistake to make, right? Just especially when you're new to a build, you don't know the core talents like off by heart. it's very easy to pick up a like pedigree with 1 or 2 mods that you already have. So just make sure you don't make this mistake, right? So these don't stack. You don't get 2 of them. Just I'll happily own the mistake if it saves someone else the trouble, right? So this whole time we were doing it essentially with like 25 to 30% additional damage less than we could have. But you can get like Frozen Lotus on your pedigree. It's like 25% additional damage. It's like right here, like something like Frozen Lotus, Frostbitten, be quite good for like an early pedigree, right? But yeah, so going into day 3, it's just like increasing level of gear. So it's just swapping out of like low level pieces of gear, swapping into 86 stuff. So you're able to roll tier 1 mods, get your tier 1 mods everywhere. Pick up a prism. So I think I used 10% additional damage over time one. Yeah. Just pick up a cheap one for the 10% additional. So at this point, you're just, you're picking up like all this additional damage layers, just so you're scaling your damage more and more. Pick up a cheap Nether Kings, Broken Divinity, etc. Assuming they last till next league, or if you're playing at this league, pick up one of these because they're very strong. But yeah, you can see just like generally the gear's getting better. And then day 4, this is the last one I'll go through. We hit a very big shipment, so we hit a 4.2k shipment, I think, from Sandlord, which is the biggest one I've ever hit, and it was like day 4 of the league. It was super hype, and I just straight away brought 8 Lone Walkers. So this day 4 one is the Lone Walkers swap, so quite early compared to like what a lot of people done, but I just had the chunk of money, I just decided to spend it on Lone Walkers. But you can just see, in general, the gear is just like slowly, incrementally getting better, memories just, slowly getting better, slates slowly getting better. We did replace it with a double pedigree, and this was the point where we realized that we were using a useless pedigree the entire time. But yeah, just yeah, you can just see it's all the changes are from like here to here early game, and this goes all the way up to like profound. This goes up to the trillions of DPS. This goes up to SS20. So all the build codes are, of course, in the description. Next up is slate mods, so they're particularly important this league because of Nether King's Divinity. So you can see here this Judgment is giving 70% increased effect. Now this does round up if it's an integer, so this does actually round up +1 levels to +2, which is obscene. Absolutely so strong. Like, Slateboard is very important usually, but it is like doubly important this time. So slate mods, I will talk about the Nether King's Judgment first. So I've actually only got like a 1 mod one, right? So I've got the additional damage applied to life, 50% Ill Omen cumulative efficiency base, but I've also got 8% additional Affliction effect. Now these are expensive to roll. These are like 600 to randomly roll, and then if you want to nail them, it is like 2k to randomly lock one of these. So I just chose to hit one good mod and then just stick on the other 2. These 2 mods are useless, so the physical damage and the lightning damage, totally useless for our build. So don't pay attention and don't copy these. This has only got one good mod on, but it was good enough to get, our goals done. So that's, why we stuck with this. As for other slate mods, like regular slate mods, you can see I have them listed here on my spreadsheet, which is also in the description. So I would say they're roughly in order of like how strong they are. So +1 skill levels are absolute premium, but they come at a premium price this league, like very expensive to actually get good corners and good fallen starlights with these on. And then like under that would be additional damage mods. So you can see these mods get scaled like 70%, like they're very good, like 17% additional damage against frozen enemies instead of 10%, and 27% bullet effect instead of, I think it's 16%. And then like frostbite effects along with like blur effects, stuff like immunities. These are for like divine ascent and for deep space. And then like frails, another damage multiplier, torment. You can get this on like a fallen starlight out on the side. So if I like this Fallen Starlight for me is like the one that I swap in and out of like immunities, torment, reap, starting energy shield charge, stuff like that, depending on the content I'm doing. Cooldown, so cooldown reduction, actually very good. Gets scaled quite a bit, and it's very hard to get. Like elsewhere, there's only really like one source of getting it like easily, which is the Lich Tree, which is these nodes here on the Lich Tree. So you can get cooldown effect there. I think Dom explained it pretty well, but it reduces the cooldown speed of your Terra charge from 0.5 seconds to, whatever you can get it down to. So it fires off quicker and you have a higher portion of your remaining Terra charge. So you get higher damage like that, and also obviously fires off quicker too. Then like focus blessings, if you need a source of focus blessings, paralysis. This is hit, so you have to have a source of hit, I believe. So like make sure you have Blizzard with Freezer Point. And then for Never King, to ideally get like a GG one, it would be like damage per sealed life and additional damage per slate in between. So I think damage per sealed life is like 14% additional at 99% sealed life. And the damage per slate in between is 3% per slate in between. You can get 4 slates in between. So as for pedigrees, I have on the same sheet a bunch of different options for pedigrees. So again, listed roughly in order of like how good they are. There are like caveats to some of these. So like Indifference, you would want to get Effortless Command. Translucent, you need a source of lightning damage on hit. So, Blizzard with Freezing Point ideally. So you would get this on like a Corner of Divinity or Fallen Starlight with adds flat lightning, fire, and cold from the Elementalist tree. And this would make it so Translucent's actually like giving you the cold damage. Chili and Bunch, these are for the Israfel's Law variant. Reap Purification, you need 150% total Ill Omen cumulative efficiency because it reduces your Ill Omen cumulative efficiency by 50%. And Windwalk I used Windwalk for quite a while. It's 60% additional when they hit max Affliction effect, but it only lasts for 4 seconds and you can only put it up once. So it's only good while mapping. So I would not keep this for SS20, but very good for mapping and very good like through the bulk of progression of the build. Tanky options like Quick Wits, very good. Poisoned Relief, Defensiveness, plus you need your capped block. Holiness and Shell. Like Shell probably should be down here in budget options, but I guess it is a tanky option. And then Verbal Abuse, Master Escapist, Stealth Stab if you don't have Valeries, and Shrink Back are all like budget options that you can get on a 2-mod pedigree, but I wouldn't pay a premium for any of these as the second mod when combined with these. I'm not going to go through every single one because it's just too much. It's the same as every deep dive that I go into. If I was to go into all these pedigrees and all the different changes you'd have to make, like slight adjustments on your build, we'd be here literally for like 2 hours. So you have to try and think for yourself a little bit with these, unfortunately. Make sure you don't. It's so like rich me saying that when I doubled up with subtle impact for the first 3 days of the league, But it's if I make a mistake, I always make sure I bring it up, so it hopefully saves other people from doing it. So, yeah, that's pedigree options. Next, I'm going to talk about defensive layers. So I actually covered these in the SS20 video, but in case you haven't seen that, I'll cover them here. So very basic, the start of the defensive layers, I guess we could say, like the basic defensive layers that every build should have. I've got 10k ES, and I've also got capped or near capped resistances. It sounds a bit silly mentioning these, but I have seen quite a lot of people not using resistances. I also like forego resistances early. Like it doesn't. The progression in Torchlight is like mainly about your damage, so it doesn't really matter too much about dying early. It only really matters when you're getting to like 98, 99, and if your goal is to actually hit 100, that's when you really don't want to die. You're not really penalized for dying in Torchlight, is what I'm trying to say. So, yeah, I sometimes forego resistances early, but when you're getting to the point where you're actually tackling endgame content, you do want these resistances to be capped or close to cap. The main defensive layer I have is Blur, so I think this is a good item to show you on. So Blur. So what Blur does is gains 100 points of Blur rating. 10 Blur rating is lost per second. Blur is lost once a Blur rating drops to 0, and you have 0.25% chance to avoid damage for every point of Blur rating you have. So we don't just have 100 and have it cycling, we have 120 fixed Blur rating, and this is coming from our Phantasmagoria, so it's coming from here. When activating 2 legendary medium talents within the area, you have 120 points of fixed Blur rating. So we have our 2 legendary mediums here, and we have 120 fixed Blur. So you do actually, it's kind of like Fervor, you do actually need a source of Blur. So this is where we're getting our source of Blur. So make sure it's, actually fully tracked. You do need to zone out and zone into a different zone to update this. But it is actually a very strong defensive layer. So we are scaling offensive power from it too, with this Valerie's Night Stroll mod. But if I go to survival, you'll actually see our chance to avoid damage totally is 60%, which is all coming from like Blur effect dotted throughout the build. A big chunk of it is here on this Vorax, and it's just a very powerful like defensive layer, to be honest with you. Like, you will see your health like not really move that much, and then it's backed up by other layers of defense, and yeah, it felt very good defensively. I went into SS20, and for the first time I felt like I didn't really need to update my defenses. So yeah, very, very strong Blur. Next up is block. So we have 100% attack block chance and 70% spell block. Now, you really want this spell block to be 100% too. And how I would have done it if I needed it was on a memory mod. So these roll up to 31%. If I would have hit like 26%, I would have got a spell block micro. So I would have gone to my packed page and I would have just put a small micro here, like a spell block micro over like in or a Terra charge or something, right? And that's how I would have blocked my spell block if I actually needed it. With all the other defenses I had, I didn't technically need it, but you want both of them to be capped all the time, because you want them, instead of being like random chance to block, you want it to be a guaranteed defensive reduction layer of defense, right? Sounds a bit silly saying defensive reduction layer of defense, but you understand what I mean. It's moving from like a random chance to block the damage and like reduce some of that damage to a guaranteed, this is the damage reduction that we take. Along with this, we have block ratio. So you really want block ratio too, because this just changes the portion of the damage that you take, right? So it's 30% base limit is 60%. I just have 25% from defensiveness. Defensiveness we have here on our pedigree. So 25% block ratio here. So this is like, think of this like once you are at 100% attack and block chance, this is a further 25% damage reduction. So very potent, like combining these three, like attack block chance, spell block chance, damage block ratio. Next up is the smaller defensive layers. So we have minus 8% additional damage taken here on our Vorax limb. We don't actually get the Fortitude, right? Because we're not doing melee skills. However, we do get this minus 8% damage reduction. Then we also have a small amount of fizz damage taken on our slates. So I did have more of these. I only have one left over, and it converts like the physical damage you take to elemental damage. We have quite a bit higher elemental mitigation than our physical mitigation. So this is, potentially saving us from the physical damage side. Can get quite a lot of this on slates, but you are losing quite a lot of DPS. I did have quite a bit of it, see on this like corner. I think I might have sold the other ones now, but I did have quite a bit of it. I think I had 3 of these, so it was like 50% of the fizz we're taking is being converted to elemental, so that was very strong. And then also as like a soft defensive layer, I guess we're going to call it, this Reap immediately starts charging the energy shield every 2 seconds. So this is like where all of our regen's coming from. Now, another major defensive layer that we used is Divine Grace, but Divine Grace is a little bit build warping, and you need to not be stacking blessings, essentially. You need a way to generate all blessings, but you're capped at 4 blessings of each. So you obviously don't want to use this if you're in the Israfel's Law variant, because you're stacking focus blessings for that variant. But I knew I was going to go Divine Grace early on, so I knew I had to come up with an alternative for the Israfel's Law. Divine Grace is my favorite blend. I use it wherever I can in any of the builds. Was also very expensive. The Vorax cost, it cost me about 7k when I first put this Vorax together, and the blend cost an additional 6k. So the blend alone, obviously the spices go down in price throughout the league, as more people just get their blends and then sell the duplicate spices they don't need. But this was 6k when I brought it, so this was almost as expensive as just crafting the Vorax from scratch. And this was like not a cheap Vorax either. This was using items that broke down that cost nearly 3k each. So bear in mind, if you are going to go Divine Grace, it is a bit of a build around, but it is very potent because it changes the base effect of all your blessings to plus 4% additional damage and minus 4% additional damage taken. So because we're 12 blessings, this is 48% additional damage and 48% damage reduction. So this is like a very, very potent damage reduction source. I combine it with this belt affix too, the base affix of gain 1 stack of tenacity blessings and its cycles, and it just keeps them up all the time essentially. So yeah, I thought I would mention the Divine Grace here, but like I said, it is a bit of a build around, and you have to take that into account. So the last damage reduction layer we have is this Valerie's Night Stroll. It's also on the Vorax, and it gives minus 15% additional damage taken while Blur is active, and we always have Blur up. Like I said before, we don't get the plus 25% additional damage because our Blur never ends, but it is 15% additional damage taken, minus 15% additional damage taken while the Blur is active. I think that is all the defensive layers. I might have missed 1 or 2 somewhere, maybe. But I think that is all of them. And that's definitely all of the major ones anyway. So, yeah, those are the defensive layers. Next up, I'm going to go through the talents. So I am starting in the Goddess of Deception tree. So the core talents I'm using are Affliction and Subtle Impact. And then you can see here, we're just going through like damage, we're going through skill area, move speed. And then there was points where I was using like damage over time and Ill Omen cumulative efficiency. But I especially spec'd out of the Ill Omen cumulative efficiency when I thought about using the tech to like move the Ominous to like later in the SS20 fight, so it came out of it here. Also, like, you get a lot of your affliction, your affliction inflicted per second. Sorry, you get a lot of your affliction inflicted per second from here, and these are quite good nodes because they also give damage over time. And then you get a big chunk of intelligence from here. The dex doesn't matter, and then +1 persistent skill level. So this is first tree I would use. So next is Lich. Now, I wouldn't go this early on because before you have Lone Walkers, you don't want to go Lich here. You want to go with, I'll see if I can pull up one of my older TMs. So if I pull up this one, I think it might be on this one. Nope, absolutely typical. Pull up this one. Yep, here you go. So we are in Lich, but it is like down here because we are in Psychic. So Psychic here, we have Windwalk, and then we have some damage over time. Affliction, like Reap Recovery, Reap Duration, like you want all this stuff, all this Reap Duration here, Affliction effects, like all nice, all good. So early on, that's what you want there. And when you swap into Lone Walkers, you want Lich, of course. We were using Lich before to get another aura in, but this is like particularly important now we're in Lone Walkers. So we've got a lot of ES here, Affliction effect here. Plus this minus skill cost actually kind of makes a little bit of a difference if you have all of your mana reserved. So these are like very good nodes here. We have energy shield, then we have our source of blur here. It's energy shield and then source of blur, because you have to have one with the fixed blur rating. Then we have our sealed mana comp here. This is scaling our auras with lone walkers. And then we have additional damage when having both sealed mana and life here. And then we have cooldown recovery speed here. Like I said before, the recovery speed reduces the cooldown of your Frost Terra from 0.5 seconds. I have 12% cooldown recovery speed here. When I put this on, this was a significant damage increase, so I definitely recommend you do this, because it doesn't just increase your quality of life with your movement skills, your elixirs, your stuff like that. It is actually quite a good damage increase too. Other options would be these plus skill levels. So you could take prisms early, and you could block this off, because you don't really want the attack and cast speed, and the damage is quite low value for this point in the tree. And you just pick up +1 skill levels here, which is 10% additional damage. And then I'm using Off the Beaten Track here. If you don't know how Off the Beaten Track works, I made a short about it. It just, explains how it works essentially and why it's good for auras. Then in Prophetry, so Prophetry is just cold damage, crit strike rating, which is increasing our Terra, skill duration, and then Frostbite effect, max Frostbite rating, additional damage against frozen enemies. We're getting our Affliction here, and then a big chunk of our intelligence is coming from here. This is where I am using my Phantasmagoria, so I actually got this was very cheap. I was actually very surprised I got this. This was 588 FE, and then any other Phantasmagoria with this mod on at the bottom that was any good, 3x3, was 2.5 3k. So I was quite happy to hit this. So all medium talents within the area also gain 3.5% attack and spell block chance. So we have 3 lots of 3 times 3.5% attack and block attack and spell block chance. So this is giving 31.5% attack and spell block chance in total. So was very happy with this. There's obviously other options for this, like if you're in Lone Walkers, Aura Effect, Sealed Mana Compensation, very good. Then I think you can get Reap Duration, Affliction Effect, stuff like that. I think best would honestly be, I actually think they go up to 4x3, and that would obviously be absolutely insane. That would definitely be best, but 3x3 is typically what a lot of people use, because it is very easy to figure out where it's going to go, whereas 4x2 is you might have to figure it out a little bit more. But because this doesn't replace your core talent, it can go in any tree, so you're not locked into it anywhere. It could technically go here, for example, right? So you get a 3x3 one, and if it had a good effect for micros, you would go here, and then maybe these skill effect duration ones, right? Or you could put it here, and you could cover these micros. There are other options. You can have it here and save 3 points, because getting a legendary medium talent here, and but yeah, this is actually that's a lie. Sorry, you can't have it here. I thought this was legendary medium talent. It's not. It's don't put it here. But yeah, this is where I chose to have it anyway. The 4x2 made sense, and I get 3 lots of 10.5% attack and spell block chance. So yeah, this is the Prophetry. I think if you go for an inverse image, they're very expensive this league, because I think they reduced the drop, the rarity, or they increased the rarity of them, sorry. If you go for an inverse image, you really want the inverse image here, essentially. And if you get a very, very good one, you want to copy all the Frostbite effect, the max Frostbite rating, and these legendary mods. Otherwise, you just, put it here and it copies them down to here. And then you would need to move your Phantasmagoria. You would need to actually have your Phantasmagoria elsewhere. So just bear that in mind. Yeah, I guess I'll talk about the other prisms after I've done the Steel Vanguard too. So Steel Vanguard's the last tree that I went for. So it doesn't have insane points in the middle, you can go for these like erosion resistances. But I went for the elemental resistance here. Is quite a decent chunk, like 18% LE resist is quite good. And then a good chunk of energy shield here too, so 27%. And then the aura effect, 15% aura effect because we're lone walkers. And then additional damage applied to life, 8% here, pretty good. And then the minus additional elemental damage taken, and converts 8% of fizz damage taken to random elemental damage. Now, you could probably drop these points here, but I guess it is another defensive layer, like I should have mentioned before. But they're not bad points, right? They're pretty efficient, I would say. Like 4% elemental damage taken, or 4% minus 4% additional elemental damage taken per point here, and then 8% of fizz converted to LE is like pretty good. And as for core talent, I'm using Reflection. So this is giving 30% additional damage because it's 6% for each type of aura you're affected by. We have 4 auras plus the one from our boots, so that's 5 auras. But that is the talents. So as for Phantasmagoria, other prisms, so inverse image, like I said, you definitely want it on your profit tree. So you want to. It depends how the rolls are. I guess if it's like extremely expensive, like you would put it over this max frostbite rating one, and then you would copy. Ideally you'd want like medium and legendary medium effectiveness. So you'd copy this medium node here, and you'd copy the 2 legendary mediums, like they go over here. If you have micro effect one, you obviously want to copy the max frostbite rating that is under this Phantasmagoria here, and the frostbite effect. So you'd want to copy those and make sure you're allocating those. But it's very expensive, totally not necessary. But if you get one, that's where you want it, essentially. You want to look at your rolls and then figure out where you're getting the most damage from, like, this portion, essentially, of the profit tree. Because this is just very efficient. I've used this setup, like, multiple times now to do SS20 runs. So that's inverse image. Phantasmagoria, as I've said, you want the 120 points of fixed blur. The fixed blur is particularly important because it's not like ticking down, so your damage actually is like quite consistent, and your defensive layer is quite consistent too. But the medium talents, the micro talents, whatever it rolls here, is just flexible, and then you just figure out where to slot it in depending on what you roll with the effect area or the medium or micro talents. So other options that you could use for your prisms. So Crushing Blast. Quite a lot of people are using Crushing Blast. Crushing Blast gives like a big explosion effect and 30% additional damage dealt to elites. However, these were quite expensive when I checked them last. Okay, they're not like insanely expensive, but I guess these ones are like with Origin of Spirit Megas effect, so they're not like very nice for our build, but like this would be a decent one, right? Is like, you get the Crushing Blast and it doesn't replace, so it just adds Crushing Blast, which is the explosion and the 30% additional damage dealt to elites. It does count bosses for elites, so Crushing Blast, pretty good option instead of a Phantasmagoria, but you'd obviously probably, I mean, you can still use Blur, but the fact that you're getting the fixed blur is what I really like and is the draw to the Phantasmagoria for me. So maybe you'd want to drop all the blur stuff in the build, but that's up to you if you want to take that option. And another one that you could possibly use is Effortless Command. So Effortless Command gives you plus 1,000. There you go. Effortless Command gives you plus 1,000 max energy, minus 30 all stats on this roll. So because you get plus 1,000 max energy, you can just like fully trick out your skills. So you can just like have most of these at 5 auras too. You can fit like Restrain, Precise Standards 1, or Amp, Malleable on like every single one. So that is also very good. And then you'll also have enough you'll also have enough left over energy to put Indifference either on your Pedigree or on your Belt Blend. And this will give you up to 50% additional damage as long as you have 500 remaining energy. So this is very strong as well. So those are like the Prism options. Next, just going to zip through the skills. So we will start with Frost Terra. So this is the current setup I'm using. Now, sometimes I do use a map setup where I swap concentration out for increased area. So it just gives you increased area, concentration reduces it, but gives you like a higher multiplier on damage. Obviously, while you're mapping, the damage gets to a point where it's not too relevant. You just want like nice quality of life, so I sometimes do that. Cataclysm is kind of a lock-in, like 43% additional affliction effects, pretty good. Plus, it generates a bit more affliction too. Pain Amp, pretty good, 35% additional. Control spell is 44% additional, but it does reduce the crit strike rating by 100, so this does actually reduce your Terra charge duration a little bit. It does affect it. However, once I got to a certain point with critical strike rating, when I had quite a lot of it, this was way worth using over. I can't remember what I was using instead of it. I think it was Grudge. I think I had this as my source of Grudge, and it was 20% additional here. So it was way worth swapping back to Control Spell. As for the Frost Terra Rhyme, so a lot of people send their build codes and they have a purple one of these on. Now, if you have a purple one of these, I understand why people are buying them. They're a lot cheaper. They're like 200 FE, right? But if you have a purple one of these can go all the way down to like 24%. These are cheaper, but you're only getting 24%, right? Because you're not leveling a purple one. So the main draw from this is actually like a high roll one. A high roll one gives just 35% flat, and then when you level it, it gains 20% additional total. So this is giving 55% additional total, right? If I could just use like Grudge for 20% additional and a source of Paralyze. I could just use increased area for 20% skill area and 20% additional. You know, I've got different options here that give like the same amount as a purple rhyme would give. So honestly, save your money. Do not buy purple versions of this. It's just not worth it at all. Swap to this when you can afford a red one, and the red ones are expensive now. These were when I leveled my rhyme, these were like 700. It's a bit of a shame to see them as expensive as this. I guess like technically the roll is like as low as 32%, but you know, still 2k. The same with everything in this game. The more corners you cut, the more damage you have to get elsewhere, right? So just don't cut this corner. Just don't use it until you can afford like a 34 to 36% additional one, in my opinion. And then remember that you're also probably leveling this too. So to level this, I did write it down here on this. I haven't like made it nice to look at yet, but to level this, remember that it takes 15, 30. It takes 50 total XP, which is 5 red quality ones, and they're 2k each. So this is like 12k now to level. You're definitely better buying one at level 5. Actually, never mind. I saw this was a lower tier, right? This was like 32%. So I guess if you want one at 32%, you buy it at level 5. But if you want one at like 35, 36% like I've got, it's like 15k. Like, probably better just making it yourself. But yeah, just I wanted to mention that, like, do not waste your money on purple versions of any canvas skills, to be honest with you. Like, none of them are really worth buying when they're purple. So yeah, don't waste your money on those. They're basically just for leveling skills up. So next up, we chose to go Blizzard for our Empower spell. So Activation Medium Elite, Well Fought Battle, increases the effect of it, and this is our source of Grudge, because we're hitting. So sorry, not our source of grudge, our source of paralyze, so it increases damage taken by 15%. So again, we've got freezing point here. You don't need to level this one. Freezing point, again, do not waste your currency on it with a purple version. I know it's very appealing to buy a copy that is 15 FE instead of 1500 FE, but just please do not waste your currency on it, because it's like half the effect. It's like half as good, right? I haven't ran the numbers, but it likely isn't as good as just any other empower spell that you can just get elsewhere, right? Something else I will mention is Activation Medium Elite. So Activation Medium Elite can only support Empower, Defensive, Restoration, Curse, Warcry, and Elixir skills. It doesn't support channeled skills. Blizzard is a channeled skill, unfortunately, because of the stupid new like system. I can't click this and show you the tag here, but it is a channeled spell. However, Freezing Point kind of overwrites that channeled spell, and it becomes an empower skill. So because this is an empower skill, it can be supported by Activation Medium Elite. So I've actually had a few people ask about this and how you can get this in. You need to have Freezing Point, and yeah, you need to have Freezing Point in first, and then you put in Activation Medium Elite. As for move skill, so I used Blink for the majority of the time. I did use Frigid Transmission for SS20. I talked about it there, about why, so go check that out if you want to. But it's essentially Frigid Transmission has like a variable dash distance, whereas Blink doesn't. Blink goes the exact same distance every time. And I have got Activation Medium Multi-Strike in it with 21% additional cooldown recovery speed. Now, we don't have any source of Multi-Strike in the build, so this is never randomly proccing. However, we still get the 21% additional cooldown recovery speed, so that is the tech behind this. Again, it's another weird one. Sometimes people ask about it, but yeah, so that is explaining that. It's like you get a big chunk of cooldown reduction here because of this. And then Ice Bond, I kind of like Ice Bond. It has like great uptime. You can also put Grudge here if you're not using Blizzard. You can put Grudge here, but it only puts Grudge on when the enemy is in between like you and this beam. So it would only be putting Grudge on here, and it wouldn't be putting Grudge on like that, right? So, but yeah, in this Ice Bond, we're using Well-Fought Battle, Mass Effect, Activation Medium Sentry. Would definitely recommend getting Activation Medium Sentry over like Preparation. This just increases the uptime of it, like basically goes to 100% as soon as you get Activation Medium Sentry, so well worth it. And Mana Boil. So I've got Mana Boil with Activation Medium Boss. Really, this should be like Activation Medium Elite, but I was using this for SS20, doesn't really matter. Yeah, Mana Boil gives you additional spell damage. When your mana drops to 0, you lose the effect, so you just need to make sure you're not ever hitting 0 mana. And then we've got Mass Effect and Well-Fought Battle just to increase the effect of it. I will talk about defensive skills quickly too. So defensive skills. I didn't use one. This is actually probably one of the first SS20s I didn't use a defensive skill on, because I didn't have to, because I had good enough defenses elsewhere. But the options I would probably look at is Forced Start. So Forced Start charges your energy shield when you use it. It gives you energy shield recharge speed. That's probably the best option, I would say, is Forced Start. It is like a soft defensive layer, but it is quite strong. It's quite good. As for other like more hard, I guess you could say, like defensive layers you could use, Delayed Pain, the injury buffer, very good. However, my recovery wasn't the best, so I didn't really want to like just have the injury buffer and just take the damage and not like over recover it, if that makes sense. Aegis of Fire can cover your attack and spell block chance, especially early, if you need to. And Frost Shield. So Frost Shield gives minus fizz damage and minus fire damage taken. So Frost Shield is like only mitigating these two, but it's like a big damage reduction effect, if that makes sense. So those are like the hard defensive options. I would probably stay away from defensive buffer just because as a spell-based build, we don't really have good sources of Tenacity Blessing, and this constantly consumes them. So we don't really want to take away our Tenacity Blessings, if that makes sense, because it consumes 4 to give you minus 8% Fizz and elemental damage taken, whereas Tenacity Blessings are just 4 damage reduction on their own, so you're actually losing tankiness if you're consuming them. So this does scale with level a little bit, but yeah, definitely don't want to be left without Tenacity Blessings. So yeah, those are the defensive skill options if you choose to use them. Just going to talk about endgame rares next. So we'll start at the top, go through the armor, then the rings and the weapons. So because I'm Lone Walker version, I want to be in sealed mana compensation wherever I can get it. So because of Lone Walkers, gives us aura effect from sealed mana compensation. You can corrode this down to 1-1, which is great with the caveat that if you have minus sealed mana compensation, like on some supports, it does reduce the aura effect, but in general, this is like the best support to get. Oh, the best corrode to get, sorry. So ultimate mods, sealed mana compensation, and support skill level. Support skill level's very, very good because it increases all of your supports everywhere. So it gives you like additional damage here. You can see these are plus 13 levels. Majority of this comes from the helm ultimate mod. So you can see getting all these levels. Levels on Well-Fought Battle just increases the effect of this, increases the grudge uptime because it scales the chance to paralyze, like, you know, increases the buff we get from Magic Dash, like, all the way throughout the build just increases, like, it just brings the floor of the build up, essentially. Gives us, like, more aura amplification, is very good with Precise Stand as 1, because this goes all the way up to, like, 36.5% aura effect, so very, very good there. Restrain, so it, like, you know, gives you even more sealed mana compensation. Like it just does a lot. It's just my favorite ultimate mod to use on Helm. Yeah, very, very good. Other mods like Intelligence, Gear Energy Shield, Reap Duration, Crit Strike Rating, just like typical mods you'd want on the build. Over to the body, it's very much the same story. So we've got sealed mana compensation, then we've got aura effect on the suffix, and then, you know, advanced mods, basic mods are Intelligence, Gear Energy Shield, Reap Duration, Crit Strike rating. Then on the gloves, ultimate mods chose to go for were active skill level. So this is up to level 10 of your main skill. This is 10% additional. And past, up to plus 10. So up to level 30 of your main skill, this is 10% additional. And past 30, it is 8% additional. So this is like 20% additional right now. So very good. And Blur Effect was the other ultimate mod I went for on Suffix. And then again, very much the same story. Gear Energy Shield, damage, Reap Duration, Crit Strike rating. I chose to go for 3 basics on this because the advanced are all like adds, if that makes sense, right? So adds percent. So I guess this adds percent of cold damage as erosion damage could have been fine, but like it was like get rid of crit strike rating for like skill area, or get rid of damage for like this adds cold damage as erosion damage, and I just thought I'll just keep the damage roll. So that's what I did with these. You'll see all of these 3 bases have sealed mana compensation on the base. This goes from 6 to 8%. If the price difference isn't much, then, you know, get a 7-8% one. I think when I brought my first one, the difference in price was like 6% was a couple of hundred FE, 8% was like 800 FE, so I just went for a 7% one in the middle, which wasn't that much more expensive. As for rings, so my priceless ring bases, I went for Blur Effect. Kind of cheaped out on the actual base themselves, though. This is just like the lower tier, so this is plus 3% LE res instead of 4%. And this one's the lowest tier, so this is 4% erosion resist instead of, I think, like 12% erosion resist. So, you know, we would have been capped here if we would have spent a lot more. But it was like, I think this was like 1k or something, and a 12% one was like 5k, I think. It was very expensive. But ultimate mods on these, additional damage against frozen enemies is great. Elemental penetration, very good. I think we've got too much, so we've got 40% here, and then we've got 30% on, or 27% on this scepter. So I think we have way too much elemental penetration. Typically, it is recommended you get about 30% elemental penetration, and then if you're a hit build, you get the armor pen as well. And spell block chance for the advanced mod, we went here just to cap out our spell block chance. And on this one, we went for Terra charge recovery speed to cap out our Terra charge recovery speed. The other ultimate mod was elemental resistance, erosion resistance. And then we got frostbite rating here. We had to get this to 25 to make sure we were at 100 frostbite rating. And then like fill in with energy shield, reap duration, erosion resistance. So on the scepters, so cheap scepter bases, brought these early, didn't want to go crazy. Best ones are definitely like the additional damage over time ones. That's just like its own multiplier, I think. But we went for Affliction effect. As for the actual mods, ultimate mods were penetration and Terra damage enhancement on the main hand, and Terra charge stacks and Terra damage enhancement on the offhand. As for advanced, cold skill level on both, is where we're getting most of our skill level at the minute. Plus reap duration on main hand and Terra charge recovery on the offhand. And basics, reaps on both rolled pretty well, 0.23 and 0.24%, or 0.23 seconds and 0.24 seconds, along with Affliction effect. I will quickly talk about Terra charge recovery. So how this works is, I'll go get my gash stacks up. How this works is you want to have 1%. We'll look at it on the actual dummy. You want to have 1%, or sorry, you want to have 100% per one charge you have. So, and you need more if you have cooldown reduction. Check out Don the Crown's spreadsheet about it. That'll tell you exactly how much you need to be like fully capped all the time. But how these work and scale damage is essentially like when you use the skill, it gains additional damage for each Terra charge it currently has. So you want your Terra charge restoration to be enough that it always has the max amount of Terra charges when it goes off, right? So the rule of thumb before you add like cooldown reduction and get into the super detailed part of it, is for every +1 you want 100%. So we are at 5, so we have 400%, right? So it's every +1. So we have +4, so we want 400%. Now this is lowered by gash, right? You get -12% each stack of gash. So you can see we have like baseline, we have 499%. So we're losing 95% because of gash. So take that into account as well. I just realized that I didn't talk about the Terra charge stuff, so I thought I would quickly mention it here. And if I just go up here and I go to Frost Terra, you will see it gets 26% additional damage for each Terra charge consumed. So that's where the damage come from. But yeah, that's the rares gone through. Anyway, that's the endgame rares. Next up is Pactspirits. So Pactspirits that I chose to use was Dreamweaver, Greedy Chestnut, so this is mainly for the reap duration, and Abyssal King Soul. So those are the 3 I used. You can see where I'm like writing over mods here. And something to mention with Dreamweaver is this resistance penetration is when you hit an enemy with elemental damage. So you need to have the 2 sources I've seen so far are Ice Focus, so the non-aura. It's a focus skill. It reserves mana, so you either use that to hit, or your Blizzard procs it. So ideally, you want one of those 2. If not, you lose this part of the pet. As for alternate pets, I've seen people use Fire Swordsman. So Fire Swordsman is legendary pet all the way down here. He gives an extra reap and reap duration. So he's very good. He'd probably be like the upgrade to the purple pet that I have. I have also seen people use Preserver, so Preserver is like a pretty good generic one. It's got move speed, and it has like elemental resistance, XP protection, damage avoidance, like pretty good generic pet to use, but this is a defensive option. Some people use Ice Puppet as well, but he's quite hard to get because he's on a very bad banner, so people don't really swipe for him as far as I know. But he gives you max frostbite rating, so he lets you hit your breakpoint early on. Very helpful. Obviously, the banner pet as well, the current banner pet for Selena. So every season, the new hero gets released with a pet that is like custom made for him. I think there's more people using Starweaver than actually using Ice Mirror. I don't think Ice Mirror is that good, but it does give you like just good generic stuff that you want, right? So it gives you this additional Terra skill damage, stacks up to 3 times, right? So it's like 12% additional here. Then it also gives you like Terra skill area, Terra charge recovery, Terra skill damage. So it's just like good generic stuff. Also seen people use Poisoned Omen just for full uptime on 2 curses. Another, another good option. Outside of that, I think for legendaries, they're not really that many more options. But for purples, you could just pick like decent purples. They're not like that much worse than legendaries in most cases. I used Greedy Chestnut. You can use anyone with like curse effect, additional damage, stuff like that. Like probably not this one because it's like ailment stuff, but damage over time, affliction effect, affliction per second. Like this one's fine, right? So just use those if you don't have legendaries. Next, I'll talk about the micro fates and the medium fates, I guess, and the kismets that I use. So early on, you really care about damage, so you want to put stuff like intelligence in and reap duration. It's because like your progression is sort of gated by how much damage you do. Whereas when damage isn't a problem later, you want to just pad these micro fates with whatever stat you need, right? So if you need Terra charge recovery, you can just get that here. If you need resistances, you can just get them here. If you need a little bit of block chance, you can just get it here. You can just use your micro fates on Selena to just pad exactly what defensive stats you need at the point. As for mediums, I used like intelligence, I used reap duration at certain points, and they're just for like small increased damages before you get kismets. Kismets that I'm using at the minute, Kismet Growth Ring, so like Terra Charge Duration, Terra Skill Area, Terra Charge Recovery. Just very good, like generically good, right? The Terra Skill Duration gives us more damage from our Cycle I Resist. The skill area increases uptime on bosses that you have to jump out of, like SS20, while also being like very good for clear as well. And the Terra Charge recovery speed, you just need a certain threshold amount of, right? I also chose to use Scorpion Stinger. This was after I got Approaching Nightfall, and this is because it gives quite a lot of reap recovery. Recently in Torchlight is last 4 seconds, so this is capped out pretty much all the time. You need to do 10 reaps in 4 seconds, so it's capped out all the time for us. You need 2 of these, and yeah, this is just what I chose to use myself. Other kismets that I've seen people use but I haven't used myself would be like Iron Wall, so minus attack block chance, basically lose it from your dual wield weapons, and gain 30% block ratio, so you can soft cap it here. I've seen people use like Star Trail setups, but this is like an expensive setup that you really need Undetermined Fates to use, so it's kind of like a very endgame setup. I've seen people use Black Square, if I can find it. I don't know if I can find it here. Black Square here, so like additional damage over time and energy shield. Some people use. I've also seen people use Plague Source, so this gives like a pretty big reap. It's 3 seconds of reap, but it's quite a long cooldown. So it's 99-second cooldown. But I have seen people use these. I didn't want to bother working it out myself, to be honest with you. But with Selena too, it doesn't seem like there's any really, really crazy kismets for her that you have to like have, right? So yeah, like Black Square, very good. The Terra charge duration one that I can't remember the name of, growth ring, is like pretty good. So like I would probably, if I was like to carry on min-maxing this build, I would probably choose to use Black Square and probably growth ring myself. But yeah, those are the other options I've seen people use. Moving on to the hero memories. So these are the mods that I chose to go for. So Affliction Effect and some block chance on the base. Affliction Effect, block chance on base here. Affliction Effect damage on the last one. These don't need to be like the best. You know, don't need to be the absolute best you can get. You can get away with like a tier 2 on the second mod as long as it's useful. So like other good mods be like crit strike rating. So I think most people were doing like some combination of block, affliction effect, crit strike rating on the actual like base affixes. As for the affixes you want to roll, so like spell damage, damage over time, more damage over time, blocks, so you can get it's where like you primarily get your blocks is memories if you need them. And then you see on the last one we've just got damage over time and cold damage just because we hit them both at tier 0. So those are like generic hero memory like mods that you'd want. Kind of nothing like no curveballs there, I suppose. As for revival, so the revival approaching nightfall, so minus 50% additional ailment duration. I guess we do deal frostbite, but we don't scale like ignite, trauma, freeze, numbed, will, whatever. It additionally sells 35% of the remaining total damage over time when reaping. Then it removes all the damage over time. So this, as far as I can tell, this doesn't work on Cycle Eye resist. This only works on regular reaps. But what this essentially does is it is a pseudo reap for an additional 35% damage on those reaps. And then it removes all the damage over time. But because we've just constantly got damage over time within our ring, it just puts the damage over time back on them, right? And then there's no cooldown on this or anything. It's just, as far as I can tell, it's a 35% damage multiplier over the or a 35% damage, 35% additional damage multiplier on the reaps on our weapons. Essentially, is like how I understand it. The reason why I don't think this works on Cycle Eye Resist is because Cycle Eye Resist is like a huge chunk of our damage, and when I got this revival, I actually slammed it on the exact memory I was using, and it didn't increase any of the other mods, right? So I was kind of in the perfect position to test how much damage it actually gave, because I'm only adding Approaching Nightfall to the build, right? And I added Approaching Nightfall, and it didn't increase the damage by that much on its own before I put the reaps back on my weapon, and then it was like very good. So that's the reason why I don't think it works with the Cycle Eye Resist, because you would expect to see a 35% additional damage increase when Cycle Eye Resist is like the bulk of your damage, right? So that's the reason why I don't think it works with Cycle Eye Resist. Next up, going to talk about the sequences, and the sequences you actually have quite a few options for both basic and in-depth, but firstly we'll go through the basic. So you have additional damage over time, affliction effect, affliction inflicted per second, reap recovery speed. Remember, these are only effective on the reaps on your weapon. Reap duration, blur effect, and minus 10% all resistance when the enemy has max affliction. Now, because these are cheap, I would say just like go for whichever one like you think is going to be helpful for your build. That sounds a little bit stupid saying that, but like obviously don't go for blur effect if you don't have Valeries or a Vorax with Valeries on. The best overall out of these is likely, like for generic use, is probably this 8% additional damage over time. However, even the ones I haven't highlighted down here, so like 10% move speed, Terra charge stacks here, and 8% all stats, they're all usable if you hit them early in the league when base mods are expensive. Base mods for the first few days are like 18 through to like 15 FE, but right now they are less than 1 FE each. So right now it's like less than 10 FE to just roll this, and so I would probably go for additional damage over time. On my ones, I stuck with reap duration and just stuck with that through both of them. But yeah, but best one's probably additional damage over time. If you want to keep reroll until you hit that, then that's great. But they're obviously expensive early, is like what I'm trying to say. Like all of these are also great. You know, take into account Blur is only really while like you have Valerie's on. And then, like, as like a secondary one, if you manage to hit these like Terra charge stacks, movement speed, all stats, they're also usable. So that is the basic sequences. As for advanced, well, best ones are probably Deep Pain Aura. Excuse me, Deep Pain Aura. So 100%, 120% Deep Pain Aura. This is very strong. So Deep Pain at level 20. If I show you like a precise Deep Pain, and we look for level 20, it's 40% additional damage over time. So you get 120% or effect it is, so it's 48% additional damage over time. It does give you minus sealed mana res though for the Deep Pain. Now, I don't have one to test. So I don't have one to test, so I can't tell you if this is actually screwing with the aura effect from Lone Walkers, because it is on boots and it doesn't have a mana res, if that makes sense. So take that into account. You might lose some aura effect there, but you still gain 120% before that, if that is actually taking it away. Bit of a corner case, whereas like you don't actually have it on, right? So I can't exactly test if this does take it away from it. But be nice if like anyone else knows and anyone can confirm that. Cataclysm. So Cataclysm is just the support. So this frees up a support slot in your main hand. So another great hit here. And then the move speed while standing on a Terra skill and plus 100% skill area. I would say these, on the surface, these are more like, this is more like a mapping one. This Explode one is definitely like a mapping one, right? I think I might settle on the Explode one, but I don't think I would go out my way to try to get the Explode one, because it doesn't add any DPS, right? It just helps while mapping a little bit. This move speed and skill area one on the surface is like a mapping one, but it's actually very good for SS20 too. So the skill area, I was having issues with SS20 because my ring, like the actual ring that my skill is quite small, right? So let's say Spacetime Wanderer is the SS20 boss. I would have to be within this distance of him at all times to do damage, right? And then there's also the bomb going off, so you have to move out. Whereas if I have a 100% skill area, I might be able to hit him from like here, which is obviously way more comfortable, right? And I can actually like, I mean, this SS20 you want to be underneath him anyway, but you have a lot more like freedom of movement with a larger ring. So I would personally say the best two would be like move speed skill area and deep pain aura effect. That way you get like an actual DPS increase on one of them, and you get quality of life and comfort from the other one. Next up, we're going to talk about blends. So I'll go through the early blends and then like the sort of mid-game blends, I guess, and then the end-game blends. So I think the cleanest way to get Frail on the build is through a blend early. So you just get this one. This one's pretty cheap, right? This is... Right now, this is going to be 10 FE to get this Frail. And Frail gives you 15%. It increases the spell damage taken by the enemies by 15%. So Frail is like very good early. You can also get 10% additional damage against frozen enemies here. You can get like +1 skill level, Ill Omen, cumulative efficiency, like the skill levels here. These would be like the main ones I would go early. You could even go like minus all resistances when the enemy has max affliction. However, I do think the best out of all of these is Frail. It's just 15% additional spell damage taken by the enemies. Very good. So core talents is like a... It really depends on what you want on your build, to be honest with you, if you're going to go for a core talent one. So you could go for like Acquaintance, 25% additional. You could go Frostbitten for the 40% frostbite effect. If you're in Israfel's Law, you could go Bunch. Could go Indifference. if you get Effortless Command on your Prism, you could go. I wouldn't go Affliction, because Affliction you really want on your like base talent, like your first talent tree, and there's not really any other options. So I wouldn't go Affliction. Could go. I guess you could go Reflection if you didn't want to play with Steel Vanguard tree. Because in Lone Walkers this is still 30% additional, and the only like real mandatory thing in the Steel Vanguard tree is the aura effect in the top right, I would say, since we're not in elixirs. But this is like there's loads of different options that you can have for core talents, basically, right? You just have to pick one that is you have to pick one where it makes sense for what you're trying to do with your build at that time, right? So if you want to get like poisoned relief for the injury buffer and the minus additional damage taken at low life, another great option. Like if you want to be tanky, you know, there's multiple different options here. These are all like very reasonable to use endgame too. However, there is another tier of talents, and it is aromatic talents. So I I live by Divine Grace, I die by Divine Grace, basically. It's the most expensive blend by far. So, like I said, it cost me 6k when I put it together. I think right now it's 3600 plus like 900. So there's still like 4.5k 2 weeks into the league. Very expensive, and you kind of have to build around it. But I just think that the defensive power and the offensive power that it offers you when you aren't if you're in a build that isn't building around blessings, it's just very good. I think it's just very good value for the sake of one blend slot, getting 48% additional damage and 48% damage reduction. So I would say if you're going to essentially build my version, I would say go for Divine Grace, even though it is very expensive. As for the other aromatic talents, I don't really think there's any other options, to be honest with you. Like, Rot Taboo is +3 all skill levels, but this take 100 true damage when casting a skill, because you cast so often, could be quite detrimental. I haven't actually tested it, so I can't tell you how bad this is, but it's unmitigatable damage. So, yeah, I don't know if I would like to do that. If you're not going to go Divine Grace, especially if you're going to go Israfel's Law, you can't go Divine Grace. You'd have to go like a core talent for your endgame one. But yeah, the only real one out of the aromatic talents that really stands out to me is Divine Grace. So now I'm going to talk about Vorax. So the Vorax that I chose to go for is on belt. So there's some downsides to this. The belt slot is actually pretty contested, especially since they added Pantheon's Blessing this league, which is a new ultimate legendary piece. I go to Trinket Belt, I can show you. Pantheon's Elegy, sorry, not Pantheon's Blessing. But Pantheon's Elegy has like randomly rolled stats here, like these mods. And they are extremely good. They are very, very good, some of these. Since they are random, it is very expensive to get like a perfect one, right? It would probably be like you would look for one, buy it, and then you'd have to make modifications to your build. But I think Don the Crown is using like Goddess of the Hunting Dirge, and I can't remember what else he's using on his, but like, so that's the reason why there is a downside to using this Vorax, because your belt slot is quite contested, especially if you go to like late game. You have stuff like Eternities as well, right? Dawn Breaks, like Light Hunter belt, like all stuff like this. But I chose to go for belt. It's because I really like this base, the game one stack of Tenacity Blessing, Agility Blessing, Focus Blessing. It just always makes sure you have all of your blessings essentially. I really like the combo with that and Divine Grace. So it's like its own neat little package of just 48% damage, 48% damage reduction. So the ultimate mods that I chose to go for, I think there's there seems to be like three options with Vorax, right? The most popular one is either on belt, or on ring, is getting Valerie's Nightstrail, and it's getting Blur. This is, Blur gains additional effect, 0.75% additional damage over time from each Blur rating. We have 120 Blur rating, so this is 90% additional on its own, and then this is scaled by Blur effect as well. So, you know, you get 100% Blur effect, it's 180%, like, it gets very good. The second best roll is, in my opinion, Stealth Stab, so it's another 15% damage reduction. You don't get this bottom bit, because I think I've said a couple of times, your blur never ends, it's just fixed, so I would say the second best is this, but I have seen some people use the movement speed as well. The movement speed can roll up to 40%, that's also very good. And the filler mods that I went for are like blur effect on prefix and suffix. This fortitude mod, I've said before, you don't actually get fortitude, but you do get the minus 8% additional damage taken. And then elemental resist, chance to avoid elemental ailments. These can be like intelligence if you want damage, and it can be like affliction effect if you want damage instead of these two mods. So other Voraxes. So there are some other options, which I'll show you here. Hey, there's me, number 3 on EU at the minute. Obviously going to drop a lot after I liquidate this build, but it is what it is. If we look at Aqua's build, this guy Aqua, he's done essentially what I done, but he done it on a ring. And this means that he can use Eternal Sea Fog, so he gets a lot of movement speed here. And I think he's also probably using this to generate blur. He might be using a Phantasmagoria. Yeah, he is using a Phantasmagoria. But so he's mainly doing this for the blur effect and the movement speed. So this is like another alternative option. If I go to not Leon, I think I did check some of these before and I can't remember them off the top of my head. Yeah, here's another one. So another option here is Dawnbreak, and this seems to be like quite a popular option too, is to get fervor and additional damage per 2 fervor rating on your ring. So this is like 50% additional, right? And then you have the fervor, which is the crit strike rating too, so it's even more Terra skill duration, so very good here. So this is another great option. And then when it's on rings, this guy's in Israfel's Law, so you can see he gets max focus blessing, additional damage against frozen enemies, and max frostbite rating. So it's another great option. And then this KR4UT crown guy is using a chest with Silent Avowal. So Wield My Sword gives you 10% block ratio and block ratio upper limit, and 1% additional damage for every every 4% attack or spell block chance. I think this is 50% additional. I think, anyway, because it says or, and it doesn't have a cap, right? So 100% attack or 100% spell block is like 200% combined. So I think it's 50%. I could be wrong on this. I haven't ever used a Silent Avowal or a Silent Avowal Vorax, but this is either 25 or 50%. So a good offensive layer. And an Absolve My Sin, which is 10% block ratio and block ratio upper limit. So he's hitting the 80% block ratio hard upper limit. And he's getting minus additional damage over time taken for every 2% block ratio owned too. So this is like a defensive Vorax option. And it's very good as well. Like this is another very good option. So those are like, they seem to be the 3 most popular Vorax options are like Valerie's, Dawnbreak, and Silent Avowal, depending on what you want to do with the build. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is Lone Walkers, and we are a Lone Walkers version of the build. This is basically like an aura stacker, and we stack Sealed Mana Comp and Aura Effect. as much as we possibly can. We can't obviously get it everywhere, but we get it exactly where we can. The version of Lone Walkers that you can use are Precise Deep Pain. You can also use Precise Spell Amplification. Deep Pain tends to be cheaper because dot builds are less popular than spellcaster builds. This aura effect line, the number that you care about is the actual aura effect, so this goes between I think 15 and 30%. And the affected by 4 or more auras, the only difference is with 5 auras, you have to actually have 5 auras, so you have 1 from your boots, and then you have to actually have 5 auras here. Now, you would think, well, you obviously have 5 auras, but sometimes people are choosing to use Ice Focus, or they're choosing to use Omegas, and these aren't actually auras. So you need to make sure, if you have a 5 or more auras roll, that you have actual auras, and you have 5 real auras. So, as for the actual like setup for the skills, is a little bit flexible. So you can drop one of these offensive skills for another defensive skill. So the ones I'm using is Spell Amplification, Rigid Domain, Domain Expansion. Now you can drop one of these for Steadfast for armor, and additional armor. Remember, this works against elemental damage too. Or elemental resistance, it gives minus additional elemental damage taken and plus elemental resist. It's also very good defensively. Offensively, I think this is probably the best setup. I don't actually think there's a different 50% aura you would want in this setup of the build anyway, instead. But when you swap over to Lone Walkers, just make sure you're getting the precise version of the skill, because it is stronger and it's base effect, so it scales up. And then I'm also combining these with Precise Malleables, or Amplification, and Precise Standards 1. So Precise Standards 1 are very expensive right now. I bought these for 1700 each. They're currently 2.8k. I only have 2 of them. The Malleables were cheap, and I guess they are still cheap, but I brought these for like 15 FE each. Now, they give you 36% aura effect if there's an elite within 10 meters. Elite also includes bosses and rare monsters. If there's not an elite, you get minus 15% aura effect. Now, that doesn't really matter because like the random mobs that aren't elites won't stop you during a map because they get washed, completely destroyed, right? It comes out in the wash, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. But this at the bottom, this line, so minus sealed mana compensation. So the problem with this is the mod on our boots. So this bottom mod, aura effect per 3% sealed mana compensation. This is local. So I was going to test this, but then I think it's about the 5th time I've mentioned him in this video. But Don the Crown actually confirmed that it is local. I guess this video is sponsored by Don the Crowns, as we mentioned him so much, but he did actually confirm that it's local sealed mana comp. So this minus 15% is minus 10% aura effect. So bear that in mind. They're still good. We're still getting like 26% aura effect on elites, but it's not 36%. So take that in mind, right? But I think that's about it for the Lone Walker setup. As for corrodes on Lone Walkers, the best mod I would say is this bottom one, or effect per sealed mana comp. This becomes 1% per 1%, so you gain 50% efficiency of not conversion, but like added aura effect from this. So this is very good. However, this would reduce the malleable by even more, because it would be, instead of 10%, it would be 15% or 16%, whatever it is. So bear that in mind. And then the other one is just like whatever it hits, right? So you can get even more aura effect here. This is probably the best, like, numbers-wise to get. But the Precise Deep Pain too can go up to, I think, level 30, and then that obviously scales more because that's the base. Movement speed is also good, but I think it only goes up to like 60%. So movement speed is probably the worst. It's obviously like fine to have. It's great to have like extra, but like in terms of actual build power, probably like this is like the very first option. This aura effect per sealed mana comp, and then aura effect here, and then precise deep pain. I believe that is everything. This is the longest deep dive I've put together so far. This is going to be over the 2 hour mark by the time I add this outro. Definitely learned an awful lot playing this character. She is extremely fun, very like unique in the way she builds, and it's given me like a good understanding of how dot works, and I'm actually going to use that knowledge with my next build, which is a Yuga 2 Ignite build. Yeah, I honestly, I don't really have much more to add. So I suppose I will just hit a Discord shill. So I have a Discord which is linked in the description below. If you are a new player, if you have any questions about Torchlight, if you have any questions about stuff that I've covered here but perhaps not covered in enough detail, then you're always welcome to jump in that Discord and ask them there, or ask in the comments below. I always respond to comments. Yeah, if you have any other questions about Torchlight, best place to ask is my Discord. I'm pretty active there. Yeah, and I guess the only thing left to say is, if it was helpful to you, it would be helpful to me if you could like, comment, and even subscribe. But obviously your view is enough, and I genuinely do it because I find it fun, and I like being helpful to the community, and showing people how I've played. Essentially, I hate to say how to play, because the whole like how to play this is like, I've been through so many options during this video, and even just like showing you the Vorax at the end there is like multiple different ways that people are building their characters, right? So I don't think there's like a technically correct answer to how to play this character, but this is how I played this character. So yeah, thank you for watching. If you watched this far, there are build diaries for this character from day one all the way through to my SS20 kill, where I go through what I've changed on that day. There's, that equates to a few hours worth of content, like describing how I'm building from the start to the end. So they could be helpful to you if you are playing Selena 2 for the first time and not sure what to do. And obviously my build codes are also linked in the description. So, yeah. Thank you for watching. It's been a very long one. And, yeah. I will catch you on the next character, which is going to be Yuga 2 Ignite, I believe it's looking like. So, yeah. See you then. Thanks for watching. Bye.